Welcome to the writer reads The Strays of Lunar One, Book 1, The Unwilling, Chapter 23, Saving Oliver. Lewis managed to keep a hold of his wolf all the way to Bufort's. It wasn't easy. The merc was as good as his word, feeding him small chewable chunks of steak cooked medium rare. Despite his comment about fingers, he used a fork. More? The guy asked, when they'd gotten through 2 steaks, and Lewis nodded. Please? He managed. The guy ruffled the top of his head, causing him to flinch away. Well, at least you've got manners, he said as Lewis tried to suppress a growl. Yeah, I hear you. Next tray's coming. They went through 2 trays more, and then the guard pulled the bag back down over his chin and fastened it. That's going to have to do you, son. Lewis gave him a frown he couldn't see, but sat back in his chair. The steaks had taken the edge off his hunger and gone a long way to satisfying the rest, but he still wanted more. We'll feed you again when we get to Bufort's. Lewis sighed. If he was honest with himself, he didn't see how Florey was going to get them off of Bufort's. That place was one of the most secure medical facilities this side of the galaxy. The guard patted his leg, and Lewis rolled his eyes. What was it with humans and all the patting once they knew you were a wolf? Comforting, a part of his mind told him, and Lewis tried to ignore it. It didn't help that the small voice was right. Lewis didn't want to think about what that might mean. It means you're a wolf, the little voice persisted, and he thought about wringing its neck. He didn't want to be a wolf. Do you want to be dead? The little voice asked, and Lewis thought of Amy and the future he'd hoped to find with her. His heart plummeted, and he resisted the urge to howl. If the girl had really loved him. He sighed, turning his head and trying to distract his mind. What was it Oliver had said? That their senses of smell were better than most humans? Lewis focused on that. The first thing he noted was that the bag muted the scents. The second thing he noted was that there was another wolf on board, and something else. Something not wolf. He sniffed the air, surprised when the other scent grew stronger. Cat? He didn't know. As a human, he'd never been able to smell the difference. For that matter, how did he know what a wolf smelt like? It wasn't like he went around sniffing Oliver, after all. Thinking about that, he tried to recall Oliver's scent. It felt as weird as, but also made sense. If everyone had their own scent, and Oliver's scent was wolf as well as human, then another wolf would smell similar, but different. His nose twitched, and the guard that had fed him laid a heavy arm across his shoulders, pulling him close until the heat of his breath curled through the bag. You give me away, son, and I'll show you what real nightmares are made of. The scent of bitter fur and acid stung Lewis's nostrils, and he sneezed. The arm tightened. Not one word. You understand? The merc's words left Lewis feeling a little confused. On the one hand, he really did understand. The merc would hurt him if he talked, possibly kill him, despite the reward offered. And that was what he didn't understand. How could the merc's companions not know what he really was? Whatever it was. It made him wish that Oliver was here to explain the sense to him. How did he not know there was something not wolf and not human on board? The arm remained across his shoulders, tense as its owner waited for his response. Lewis lowered his head. I got it. The guard squeezed his shoulder and then took his arm away. Lewis waited for him to speak again, but the man didn't, so he settled into his seat and rested his head back against it. He could always work things out later, when Oliver was around to ride shotgun. Maybe it would be better if he tried to sleep the rest of the way. The guard's scent was an ever-present reminder that another predator sat beside him, and that it was wrapped in human flesh. There was a predator guarding him, and he knew it wasn't human. It was an effort to keep his eyes closed and to get his body to relax. All that made it possible was the idea that he'd already be dead if the predator wanted, that it wanted to infiltrate the bounty hunters, and so the bounty he'd bring in alive had to be something it wanted as well. Sitting in the scent of its presence, Lewis hoped so. He let his mind drift, falling into a state of semi-sleep despite his misgivings. He didn't know how long he stayed there, his mind partially suspended. And it didn't matter. We're here, pup. Stay there until you're told otherwise. Lewis jerked his head in a quick nod, flinching away from the hand that rested on his shoulder. The guard gave a soft laugh. You're of more value alive and you're cooperating, he said. You can relax, don't you think? Lewis wasn't so sure, but he tried. Oliver? He asked, and the guard patted his shoulder. If you listen, you'll hear him carried past. If you're used to using your nose, you'll scent the medical team coming on board and then departing. Thank you, Lewis acknowledged and focused on what he could smell. Sure, the guard's scent was present, but it wasn't overpowering. As he focused, Lewis was able to identify the sweaty human male smell from the guard on the other side, and the female who was in charge, and didn't she smell good? The other 3 guards were all human and all male, and all keeping their distance from him and his escorts. Lewis wondered why, but couldn't think of a way to ask. Instead, he focused on identifying the medical team, tracking them as they passed to assess and collect Oliver. They paused at the end of the shuttle, discussing their patient with the 2 head bounty hunters. You were lucky, one of the doctors told them. Any longer and there'd have been nothing you could do. I hit him with a double dose of antivenin, the male hunter, Aiden, told them. The wolf scent was stronger from his direction. You could have hit him with triple and he'd have pulled through faster, came the blunt reply. He's a wolf. Where or Lupar? The medic's tone sharpened with interest. Where? Aiden told him, his voice sounding louder as he looked over at Lewis. That one's his changeling. Lewis was sure he could feel several pairs of eyes assessing him. Good, came the response. Their blood types will be at least semi-compatible, regardless of what they were before. It's part of the change. If we need an infusion, we'll need him standing by. You want him on ice? Aiden asked, and Lewis tensed. The hand on his shoulder gripped hard enough to hurt, the pain and pressure reminding Lewis of his reality. If he'd been in wolf form, he'd have laid back his ears and curled his lip. As it was, he stayed as human as he could, and his head was concealed in a bag, so his expression went unnoted. His captor didn't miss the rebellious tension in his posture, though, and shook him. Lewis snarled, and a second hand came to rest on his shoulder. How's he been? The medic asked. Compliant, Aiden replied. You feed him? Half a dozen steaks, medium rare. Why? Aiden asked. Round about 20 steaks, medium rare. Why? Aiden asked. Put him in a cell and give him 5 times that. If we need him, he'll need to have had a proper meal. The medic paused. Do you know what their relationship was like? What do you mean? Aiden asked, and Lewis waited. Yeah, what did they mean? I mean, if they were friendly, we might not have to put him out. He'll help willingly. Again the medic paused. Unless you'd rather he was out. Not yet, the bounty hunter told them. We find it's better if we don't have to put them under. We can hand them over, ready for whatever the client needs them for. Lewis shivered. He wasn't sure he wanted to be handed over, ready for whatever the client needed. Given who their clients could be, Lewis didn't want to be handed over at all. Ravlin might let the pair of them live, but it would be as virtual slaves, regardless of the roles they got to play. And Xanil Blue. Lewis remembered his treatment on the shuttle out of Lunar One and shuddered again. He never wanted to find himself in their care ever again. Easy, son, the non-human guard said, and Lewis resisted the urge to tell him he wasn't his son. He wanted to ask them what sort of people they were that they'd hand him over to those they knew would do them harm. But he didn't think it would change a thing, and he didn't really want to know the answer. Instead, he waited and listened and scented when the doctors guided Oliver's medical pod past. As soon as they were gone, his 2 guards pulled him to his feet. This way, the non-human ordered, and he went where he was bid, taking in the different scents of the hangar and then the medical facility proper. It was like his world had expanded exponentially, and he wondered how he'd coped before. Even without his eyes, he knew there were 6 hunters around him, the 2 leaders ahead, his usual escorts, and 2 more bringing up the rear. Had he been able to see his surroundings, he still wouldn't have been able to escape. The doctors were waiting when they reached his room. We need blood, they said, as soon as the door had closed behind them. Lewis tensed, and the grips on his arms tightened. To his surprise, however, they took the bag from his head and he blinked against the sudden light. Easy, son. Take a seat. The guard turned him, giving him a gentle shove toward a seat set against the wall. Lewis almost stopped when he saw it, but the feel of his guards moving up close behind him reminded him to keep going. He wasn't in the cell he'd expected, but a small medical room. A second seat and an office desk were set close by. Lewis slid a glance toward the guards scanning the rest of the room. The first thought that occurred to him was that it was never designed for this many people. The second was that the non-human guard was as big as he was and still made him uneasy. He crossed the room on shaky legs and settled into the chair, resting his hands in his lap instead of on the arms. One of the white-coated medics came over and stood beside him, but Lewis found it hard to take his eyes off the bounty hunters gathered at the other end of the room. That became a lot easier when the doctor laid a hand on his arm. We need to take blood, the man explained. Flare snake venom can have lasting effects, and he needs a little help fighting off the worst of them. Lewis swallowed. And my blood will help with that. The man gave him a wary look. If we combine it with nanites, we think so. But you're not sure? We're 90% sure. The doctor's voice was firm, and he tapped the arm of the chair. Can you put your arm up here, please? You're not going to ask me how I feel about needles? The doctor met his gaze. Do I need to? Lewis shook his head and laid his arm where he'd been told, flinching slightly as the needle went in, but not moving. He flicked a glance to his escort and caught the avid interest in the man's eyes. For a moment he saw something akin to hunger in the guard's face. Saw him swallow. The man caught Lewis's expression and smiled, and Lewis's wolf didn't know whether it wanted to fight or run. Stop teasing him, the female hunter ordered, and the guard huffed a short sigh. He wasn't impressed, but he stopped smirking. Lewis shifted his gaze to the female hunter. You know you don't have to be here, don't you? She arched an eyebrow. We're protecting our investment, she told him, and we still need to take you to your cell. So there is a cell, Lewis thought, which means they're not putting me out. His ears caught the schnick of the doctor changing tubes, and he glanced down. How much are you taking? He asked, seeing the size. 2 pints. You'll need to eat after, the doctor replied. He glanced at the female bounty hunter. I've ordered broth and steak. It should be waiting when you get there, and he'll need to sleep. Thanks, Doc, she replied. Pretty sure he won't give us trouble about either. Lewis caught her look and gave her nothing in reply. He wasn't going to be causing anyone any trouble for a few hours. To take his mind off the process, he looked at the hunter. Why? He asked. Why what? She asked, and Lewis tried to explain. The medical, he managed, and leant his head back against the headrest, feeling suddenly light-headed. Because we need to make sure your partner in crime is able to deliver what it is the buyers want from him. If he can't, we risk penalties. We like our reputation just as it is. Which is, Lewis asked, which is 100% for delivering our goods on time and in the perfect working order for what the client intends. So, not dead then? Not dead unless that's what the clients are asking for. Tiredness crept over Lewis, and he heard the doc change containers. He cracked an eyelid. I thought you said 2 pints. The doc looked at him, glanced at the computer. Yeah, my bad. Team wants 3. Lewis wondered what they would want 3 for, but couldn't find the energy to ask. Just as long as you don't drain me dry, Doc. He won't, the woman assured him. It's not worth the trouble that would cause. Lewis noticed she didn't threaten the man directly, but the warning was there. I won't, but the request came through for the maximum. 40%, Lewis managed. 35, the doctor said, disconnecting the last bottle and moving the needle. He placed a gauze pad over the wound. We like our margins. Press here. Lewis did as he was told and closed his eyes again. He flicked them open a moment later when someone hooked their hand under his arm. Time to go, his escort said.